Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, Greg Anthony here on this January 17th, 2017 day on our calendar. And here's my opening monologue. Sad to report, death came knocking at my doorstep just the other day. I lost a good friend and loyal companion last Friday when Miss Moose, a Red Fox lab, 14 years old, passed on in the wee hours of the morning. Moose had been suffering from pancreatitis, having several attacks in the last 6 months. This time all the veterinary care and special treatment I was giving her wasn't enough, as she died in my arms peacefully. I'm glad her suffering is over. As you may or may not understand, I'm not prepared to do a full show about her today, since I'm still in the denial stage of grieving. And that wouldn't be right, as I still can't believe she's not here, listening to my show, right under my desk, as she's done every show I've ever done on this program for over a decade. She'll be deeply missed, and so when the time is right, I will do a show about the happy times, as she provided me with great comfort and taught me much about unconditional love. You know, when death comes knocking at your door, it seems to throw the whole world out of whack, doesn't it? The events which seemed so important just yesterday fade away. And I've had my fair share of death knocking at my door, losing my mother at the age of 10, a child during my first marriage when I was right out of college, and later in life, a woman who I was close to lost her 13-year-old granddaughter. What a tragedy. A beautiful girl. She contracted a strange virus on a Friday and died being transported by helicopter to an intensive care unit on a Sunday. I watched as the woman I cared for and her daughter suffered greatly and are still not over it. It changed their lives tremendously. So, death is never easy, especially when it comes knocking on your door. Okay, let's get on with the show. I had a lot of things planned, but every time I decided on the topics today, nothing seemed right. So give me another day. Tomorrow I will get back to talking about the Vatican-led New World Order. And I have, I believe, Bert Krantz from the Alamo Ministry will be with me tomorrow. And we'll get back to normal on the Investigative Journal. But today, just before I leave this the story about losing loved ones, regarding Miss Moose, I just want to go over this quickly, and maybe I'll do a complete show on it later on when I'm have gotten through some of the grief stages. But sooner or later, I just wanted to say any discussion of pet loss comes around to this question. You may or may not have asked, but do pets go to heaven? Lengthy articles have been written on both sides of the argument, and recently there was an ABC News poll showing that 47% of pet owners believed the answer was yes. 35% said no. Now, I found out over the years, because I grew up on a dairy farm, so I'd always been around. I was the only child for a number of years till my brother was born, and I was 10 years old. And I grew up on a dairy farm, and I named my pets. I had so many, a cow that was, I can remember all of them, and I used to talk to them all the time. So you probably know where my feelings lie, but Christians, I found, have a difficult problem, and to look at it biblically is also difficult, because we're supposed to look at the Bible for authority on this, but it's not very clear in the Bible about this. But there are some Bible verses that will lead one to believe one way or the other is right, whether they go to heaven or they don't. Now, the Bible talks about the redemption of man, and is kind of an instruction manual, but it doesn't really come out right and say that animals are in heaven. But there's a number of questions that we can deal with, and I'm not going to do it today. But things like, can animals be saved? And there's one verse that's pretty interesting regarding that, and I'll see if I can pull it up. But another question you have to ask is, what does heaven look like? And looking at lessons in love, like I talked about, maybe God put pets here to teach us about unconditional love, to help us understand it, to help us understand what unconditional love is, so that we can give more love to our fellow humans. What would it be like without Miss Moose in heaven if I should be so fortunate to be there? Wouldn't be nice for me. But I guess somehow you have to make a choice, and we're going to do that on another show, okay? But I just wanted to bring it up because I know these questions will arise. So we'll get to that in another show. Okay, I just found that Bible verse. It's 1 Corinthians 7, 12 to 14. And perhaps my view at this point is, just as humans are redeemed through the love of God, pets may possibly be redeemed through our love. And in that verse, it speaks of the sanctification of a household through an individual. While it may be stretching a little bit to suppose that this household might include pets, it's not completely an illogical stretch, especially in my case, as my 2 dogs are my whole family. So think about that, and we'll get back to that subject of whether pets do go to heaven at a later time. Okay, like I said, I had a number of things planned today that were more in line with the inaugural coming up with Trump and some other things that I wanted to get into regarding the Vatican. But nothing really seems right. I still need another day. I'm thinking about certain things in general terms. And one of the things I thought about was the stages of grief that you go through when you lose someone you love, or in this case, Miss Moose. And the stages of grief that you go through when you lose someone you love are similar to what you go through when your belief system changes. And what I mean by that is, on this show, many loyal listeners have had their belief systems rocked to the core. And what I mean is that, for example, a lot of people who have come to the conclusion that, there's a hidden agenda in America, and that all the ideas of freedom and things you've been taught about the Constitution and the history of our country have been a big lie. Now, when you go through that, it's quite difficult, and there are stages that you go through. And I thought what we would do is go through those stages, which are similar to those you go through when you lose someone you love. And that also includes when you have a spiritual awakening and you begin to realize that, for example, in my case, growing up as a Catholic, when I realized I was deceived to the core when I was in Rome, and everything they taught me was really a lie, it rocked me to the core. And I think the reason is, and see how many people agree with me on this, is that you, in a sense, when your belief systems are rocked to the core, you're actually dying yourself. And a new person is going to be born again. And that's a difficult thing to go through. So it's similar to losing someone you love. Now, there are challenges to get to that point. So things like becoming totally free, you have to be able to think independently for yourself. Because we live in a world where everyone tells you what to think, but no one tells you how to think. So you're going through a whole maze of things, even to get to the point where your belief systems are rocked and you actually die as a person and become something else. And so being able to be a free thinker is important, and I always say that here on this show, because we have predators manipulating societies for their own selfish benefits. And if you go along and you don't think outside of the box, the risk of being caught in this undertow of doomed society forever is very real. We have to organize ourselves to teach ourselves and people around us to think on their own. And nothing is a better example than looking at our political system that's going on now. Everybody falls into this left or right paradigm. You're either a conservative or a Democrat. You think the way others think. And when you realize that there's so much more to this, when you even realize that that is a lie, they control both sides through the Hegelian dialectic, you realize, what the term sucker born every day is, because you've been one and I've been one, and it's a difficult thing to get over. So you have to realize in the beginning your thoughts were not your own. And when you talk to indoctrinated people, I know what it's like. You can see it all over, and it's like you're talking to them, but they're not listening. They're not hearing you. The wall has been put up, and whatever you say goes right over their head. They don't change their mind. Because the Vatican, the elite, everyone, they give us an illusion of freedom, but they control all of our choices. They do it through the media. We're barraged by television. Everything in your life is monitored now, almost regulated, taxed, and controlled. And it's not for your good and your betterment, but the benefit of the elite and others. I thought that was an interesting story I saw the other day. And they're the 8 wealthiest men in the world, many of whom are American, have more money than the lower 50% of the entire population of the world. So it's quite interesting. Now, the stages of grief, once you identify them, okay, the stages of grief and loss, you'll find that the same is true when you're looking for a path and when you realize that really you've been buffaloed, lied to, your whole belief system, both your spiritual belief system and your secular belief system, are rocked to the core. You begin to see where truth really lies. And we're no longer identified by the masses, by being controlled by the masses. Now, normally we identify ourselves by what we do, what we wear, and what we drive, all these things, right? And to change that, when you realize that something has to change, you can never go back. You're actually dying yourself, aren't you? And becoming something different. Now, this first stage that you go through when you're losing someone that you love is denial. Like I said, when I was still in the stage of denial with Miss Moose, I can't believe she's not here. I look to the floor and I still see her there. I'm talking to her. I'm walking my other dog, Max, and I'm still talking to Moose like she's with me. And I've dismissed everything that tells me she's dead, but I know she is. Now, when you're talking about changing your belief system, in the stage of denial, and when you realize that something, you basically dismiss anything. In the first stage, this can't be true about the Vatican. I did it this can't be true about the government. They can't be really this evil. Oh my God, no. They're good. It's really a self-defense mechanism that the brain uses to protect yourself. You don't want to die. You don't want this person you've been living with for so long to die. And you don't want your ego to be tarnished. you don't like to admit to yourself you're wrong, right? Much less that you've been fooled your whole life. So at this particular stage, it's a lot easier, infinitely easier, to just deny these truths you've learned rather than to really embrace them, right? It's easier to mock them than to debate it. It's easy to hide under your sheets and pretend that there's not this big monster in the room coming after you, right? It's easier to go along with the crowd. It's funny. When a person, I've met a lot of people, especially in the 9/11 movement, that came to the realization that it was an inside job and the facts of the government story were like a piece of Swiss cheese. And many of them go through that. Now, that's specifically on 9/11. Perhaps they're not going through this stage of denial in their spiritual life. But I met many people, it can't be true. The government couldn't do that. They couldn't kill the people in that tower. They couldn't have staged this event for a different cause. And that's what you go through in the beginning when you're confronted with your old self dying. And how many people have never gotten out of this stage and they just dismiss everything? Now, I don't plan on staying in the denial stage in my loss with Miss Moose. I'm there now, and I'm going to go get out of it because I've had to do it a number of times with others that I lost in my life. So I had to do it here. It was just the same. In a sense, it was difficult going through that denial stage, and I remember when I was doing it, I felt that anything would be better than to follow this stuff, but for some reason, call it divine intervention or whatever, that door was open for me, and I did walk through it. And we can't forget that denial is very, very difficult, and many people never get out of it. What about someone addicted on drugs? The same problem. But you have to get over it. Don't feel guilty. Don't feel that going in this new direction is going to make your life worse. In fact, it'll make it better. And the reason many people never get out of denial is because they don't want to live outside of this, the thing that their paradigm they're used to. It's better to hold on to the past than to move into the future. And hopefully, when I do my shows, I can get people out of this stage, give them the courage to move on because they see others have. And that's primarily what happened to me. To get out of it, I had to meet other people. I remember there were times when I do a story about the Alamo ministry, and I will have Bert Krantz on tomorrow. And when I met Tony Alamo, I was looking for anyone that had the same experience as I did of understanding what the Vatican was really all about and how it related to controlling our governments and how that all played together. And there were still some times I was doubting much of this. And I said, I can't go on anymore. But by meeting people like Tony Alamo, they help you. They helped me to go forward with really understanding this and find much more in life, both in the spiritual and in the secular world. So I want to thank him for that and others that I've had on my radio shows over the years for doing that. And that's why I continue this show, so that if somebody's listening, they don't feel like they're alone. Now, after you get through that denial stage, what comes next? Now you're realizing that you're, as a person, are changing. In fact, let's just say your old person is dying. The next stage is angry. You get angry. Wow, I can't stand being fooled like this. Some people react violently. I remember pounding my hand on the desks, walking and running and lashing out. These people are the worst in the world. And even in my speech, I went through a period, and you can go back at some of my older shows, where I was angry at these people, furious they could do this to me and others. And if you look at freedom movements all over the world, they always have this kind of anger. And this really, when you really think about it, when you look back at it, now I'm going to probably go through it with Ms. Moose. I did it the other day. I was walking by and I said, damn it, this shouldn't have happened. Why is she not here? Damn it. I remember the first time when my mom died and I was 10 years old. I went through that denial for a long time. I still thought, what is this? She's still around. This can't be true. But when I got to the angry stage, and this came years later, I denounced God. I said, no, there cannot be a God who would do this to me, do this to her at her young age. And I became an atheist. That's the anger stage. But you got to get out of it because it's not effectual. It's ineffectual in bringing about any kind of positive change in your life. What if I would have stayed in that angry stage and not been able to do anything else to see the beauty in loving other people? And although I admit it's been hard for me, and how many people out there feel the same way? But you have to get out of that anger stage because it really is detrimental to your life, can cause a lot of harm to those around you. And really finding out how the world works and how things work is really kind of like, if you've ever been in a relationship and somebody's cheating on you, it feels the same way in a sense. Now, I think sometimes this stage can be long or short, depending on the situation. And try to make it as short as possible. But there's nothing, I think it's a natural stage though. You got to go through it. You got to get it out of your system, so to speak. Blow it out of your system. But do it quickly. Because to remain that way, it takes away a lot from your life. And really, you can't think clearly when you're angry. You can't. You just can't put it all together. And so that anger stage, I've seen a lot of people still in it. When you go through all these groups, look at your politicians. They're constantly yelling at each other, especially the display we had between Trump and Clinton and all these people now marching on the streets. Their arguments are so ridiculous. I saw something quite interesting, and one of my listeners sent this to me. And I'm going to talk about this because we'll stay in the anger stage here, get to the other stages of grief when you're talking about your belief system in the next half hour. But there was an interesting protest done in Turkey recently, and it really baffled the police. It baffled they didn't know what to do. And I think you'll find this quite interesting. So when we're dealing with these issues of personalities, when we're dealing with issues of change in your belief system, try and, when you're dealing with other people, to figure out what stage they're in and figure out how you can then communicate with them, because it's really important. And remember this with this anger stage. If you're angry, you can't really communicate with anybody. So, like I said, make that stage very quick. If you can get rid of it in a minute, that'd be the best. And remember, though, I think you will go through that when you're talking about changing your belief systems. And I thought this was a good show because when we talk about all these specific events, we have to look at the big picture here, don't we? So we're going to take a break, be back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
The book of Revelation says, "The spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ." This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today, so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the Supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This ain't happening.
Okay, before we get back to the 5 stages of grief, I mentioned right before the break about this unusual protest in Turkey. Now we know if we travel around the world, we're seeing protests all over. France, Germany, most every European country, Italy, and they usually are very loud, raucous, even rioting in a sense, violence, things like that. But in Turkey, one of my listeners sent me this. I'm looking at the picture now, and there's thousands of people standing in the streets, but there's no yelling, no screaming, no fighting, and they're basically silent. The silent protest. Now, is this a more efficient form of protesting? Thousands of people standing in complete silence, protesting in squares and public places all over Turkey, baffling the police, even creating people there say a calm curiosity instead of tension and aggression. Quite interesting. Okay, back to the 5 stages of grief. And we're relating these. Now you can go to any, all kinds of different psychologists and things, and you'll get the most similar to these 5 stages as it relates to losing a loved one and so on. But it's similar when you're losing your beliefs, you've lost your belief system, and you really are a different person. So you're actually dying and becoming something else, and you go through those stages. And we're talking about that when you know, on this show, when you realize that you've been lied to your whole life by the religion you were in, most likely, and the government that you're in, the country you grew up in, and so many other things, all of the offshoots to their lies. For example, I use 9/11 as an example. When the 9/11 truth movement started, people will go through these same steps. First denial, then anger, as we discussed. And the next one, especially when you're talking about subjects we talk about on this show, and when you realize you've been buffaloed, lied to, screwed over for your entire life by these people, you reach a bargaining stage after you calm down from anger, don't you? And this is so familiar, and you probably feel this way too. You reach out to anybody. You start talking to anybody about this and telling them you want to like sound the trumpet, tell them exactly what's going on. And this can be most annoying to many people. Remember, you're reaching out to people who may have not even gotten to the denial stage, don't want to change anything, or maybe are in denial. You ruin Christmas parties, remember? Nobody in your family wants to talk to you anymore. People hang up with you on the phone when you go out. Let's say you go out on a date or something. The girl you just meet, she doesn't want or the boy, she doesn't want any part of you. They give you those eyes like, wow, you're crazy. You know, and what about and how many times I can remember going to a basketball game, and the person with me, I'd start talking about the Federal Reserve System and how the Federal Reserve System is not federal and basically is run by a bunch of foreign bankers, and it's ruined our economy. People look at you. Or how about this, when you tell them that income tax is unconstitutional and you really don't have to pay it? Oh boy, that they won't, they'll say, get back to the game. Or what about when you tell them that Building 7 could never have, they had to blow up Building 7, and that the Twin Towers was a controlled demolition? Or what about when you tell them that the Vatican is the root of all evil and all roads lead to Rome, and you get into those stories? That's when it really, then you've been automatically told to go to an insane asylum and live out your days there. But why are you, the question comes, and I think anybody that deals in subjects that we deal with, when you want to peel away everything, when you listen to Fox News or you listen to CNN or anybody in the mainstream, you begin to say, well, that's their side of the story. Then you can see the left gives their side, the right gives their side. But where's the real truth? And you start going crazy. You can point this out if you're sitting there watching the news with somebody when you're bargaining with yourself. You start saying, yeah, the war on, they'll say drugs need to be controlled, and basically we have to stop the drug cartels. But then you say something like, well, listen, do you know that the government actually is in business and making money off this, and they work with the cartels? Oh boy, you know what happens. Now, why did we do this? Why are we reaching out like this? Why are we trying to, rock the boat, so to speak? I think it's because we're looking for guidance and structure, and we want something that we've learned to be the truth to actually ring out as the truth for others. But this is the time you know something is wrong. You know you can't go back to your old ignorance, but you still don't have the clarity to really go forward in the proper way, right? And once you get, in a sense, rejected so many times, over and over again, and I can remember how many times I've been rejected by trying to get to telling people about the truth. What happened? What happens then? What happens then? That's the big question. What happens then? Okay, so we have to get to the next stage. What usually happens then, after you really have been turned down, rejected, people telling you you're crazy, you got to go to an insane asylum, you ought to do this? And oh, by the way, my other dog, Max, he usually, when I do my show, he'll go back and forth. He listens to part of it. You know, he's a male, doesn't have the great attention span as Moose had, and he looks over to where she was sleeping all the time and listening to the show, looks over, she's not there, then he probably looks at me and goes, oh God, now I have to listen. But anyway, the next stage, naturally after that happens, is depression. I can remember going into a deep depression. You will do it when you have loved ones that you lose. These stages are all coming up when you lose someone close to you. But when you've also seeing your whole life change, and actually your old self dying, when you're learning all these new things and realizing you've been lied to, a deep depression sets in. You realize, I've reached out to everybody and nothing seems to happen. I wanted to change the world, but you start saying, this is too big, and what can I do about it anyway? And so many people, what you'll do is you'll crawl into a shell. And this is the worst kind of depression that permeates these freedom movements too. And what happens is you get into a depression, and the real thoughts are, I think I know it all, or screw everybody, I don't care about this anymore. I'm the only one that's right. And I think this is the most painful stage. And it's really the hardest. Many people never get out of it. Because, you got to think about this. Happiness comes from moving forward, progress. And in a sense, at this stage, the progress you've made, you start thinking in backward terms. It's put me into a hole. Why am I alone? No one wants to be with me when I want to talk about these things. I'm tired of talking about football. I'm tired of talking about all these little things. And unfortunately, I don't think there's any way around this, because this depression, I've seen it happen to so many people, and it happened to me. Is there also a fear that sets in here? And there might be. I remember thinking, this is the fear of failure, of always failing when you go out and you try to meet people, and 99% of them turn you down. So you have to begin to face the fear and to get over that as well. So this stage of depression, and it's just generally, I'm speaking in general terms. There's so much more we could talk about. But the real question is, you got to get out of it. And don't fear. And let me just make an analogy. Don't we always say you have to get out of the beast when you're looking for your spiritual happiness, for your faith to thrive? Get out of the beast. Get out of Rome. Don't fear her. Don't fear any man. Correct? And so that goes along with all of these things that we're talking. Don't fear these people. And in a sense, the next stage, and I always add one here because most psychologists will go right into acceptance. And I add one, and I call it thoughtful insight. It's a time between the time you've now dug yourself into a hole, isolated yourself from the world. A lot of these preppies, they want to live in the mountains away from everyone and not deal with one human being. They're in a depressive state. You have to deal with human beings. This is what we're here for. We deal with it, we have to deal with it all. So running away is never an answer. It's part of the depression. But I believe between the time there's depression and acceptance, which is where you want to get, there's a stage of thoughtful insight. And that happens when you now aren't alone anymore. Perhaps you've found your Creator, you found your God. So that's why I always say spirituality and this living in this world, here we are, have to come together during this stage. And usually it comes out of depression, whether it be losing a loved one. And I can remember being so depressed, losing a loved one, that I didn't want to live anymore. I felt alone. I don't want to live without her, my mother. I don't want to live without, I don't even want to live without my dog. Half of me I've only got half a reason to live now. And you go into that depression. But immediately accepting it is not, to me, it's hard. So there's a period of thoughtful insight where you look to your Creator, you look to God, you look for answers that only you and your God and God can answer. No man can help you at this stage. No one. No man, no animal. You're on your own, baby. And that's the thoughtful insight stage, when you begin to have a relationship with God. And my goodness, the Vatican does not want you to get there. They want you to stay in the depression state, go to big pharma, get drugged up, look for all these panaceas, Prozac and the rest of these things. Find happiness, the old expression, the clown who's happy on the outside but dying on the inside. Go to comedy clubs to get happy, and then come home and want to kill yourself. Get on these drugs. Get hooked on all of these things to eventually go out. Instead of getting into thoughtful insight with your Creator, you get into an insane asylum where you're completely nuts. And that's where they want you to go. So that period of thoughtful insight, without it, I think people are doomed. And you have to find that yourself. All of the people that have been helping you your whole life, through all of these stages, comes to a point where you must realize that this is a relationship you have to have between you and your God and God itself. And unless you go there, you never get to the really acceptance stage. And I can remember, I thought I was jumping right into acceptance years ago. But then I'd fall back into depression. Depression, acceptance, depression, acceptance. And it was only till recently, and I'm talking about recently, I met people that have found their Creator when they were 10 years old, 12 years old, 13 years old, and I couldn't believe it. I would sit there and go, how can you tell me you have no doubts? I've been doubting my whole life. But just recently I found this idea of thoughtful insight, thoughtful behavior, finding my Creator, and I still have a long way to go. But it's given me a peace where my acceptance actually means something. And I don't find myself falling into the depression. I find myself being able to communicate more with people. I find myself not isolating myself as much. I, in a sense, don't feel alone. And that's very important. And I want to thank a lot of the people over the years in the Christian community that have helped me. And I want to thank people even in the other, all the different communities that I've been around. I've searched through every religion known to man, I think, and I found a little bit of good in all of them, in a sense. Even in Catholicism, believe it or not, I met a lot of great, good people. And I promised never to use that term, the baby bathwater term. And so I won't, because I'll be fined $20. Remember, we started a fund here. If you use the words I mentioned, that should be off the list. So you can't. There's good within even the worst system of evil. And when you get to that acceptance stage, how do you know it? Because you feel more comfortable with this reality now that is no longer a fiction. It is real to you. You see it. You may not be able to convince everybody, but you're not afraid to go along and with your new reality, your new person that you become. And you begin to make wiser choices. You've heard the expression, insanity is doing the same wrong thing over and over again. But you begin to make wiser choices for yourself and others as well. Positive personal things start happening to you that you never thought could happen. And in a sense, you've changed your life a bit. You see your life changing. It might not be, it's not like, wow, look, now everything's perfect. No, there's slow changes of acceptance of what you've now found, what you've been striving for your whole life. And this will actually lead you to being healthier physically. You begin to put things together, so to speak. Remember what Henry David Thoreau said? Well, I'm sure I walk around if somebody said that to me and I didn't pull this quote out, I go, well, not really. But anyway, he said, most men lead lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them. Don't do that. Sing those songs. Sometimes I find myself at night singing songs for absolutely no reason. I don't think they've got a medical term for that yet. They will come up with something. He sings for no reason. And then they'll have some new medication for that. But don't let them do that to you. And so, don't lead a life of quiet desperation. And go on to things better. And when you're in that acceptance stage and you know it, you find that you don't go back to the depression anymore like I used to. So now I knew what was that thing between it that I mentioned. And that was finding that relationship with God. And actually having faith, which I've had so little of my whole life. I've had to learn the hard way, as people would say, as a journalist, questioning everything. Unless I saw it, felt it, and I could prove it, then I didn't want to listen to anything else. And with that hardline approach in life, and I think it had a lot to do with to put everything together. It had a lot to do with, and many people have talked to me about this over the years, when you lose something you love dearly when you're young, you have a tendency not to want to go through that pain anymore. And that's why with me, each death that's close to me, especially when it hits your household, as it did with the times the losses I mentioned, and I did not mention my father, but I went through that with him. It's particularly difficult. But I've learned that even, for example, the closeness of Miss Moose that I've had is very difficult still for me. And I believe it's because I still, over the years, did not want to go through that pain again like I did when I lost my mother at the age of 10. And it made relationships difficult, and I believe it even made it very difficult for me to find a relationship with God. Because in my life, and how many people feel this way? And I'm over it now. I'm in the acceptance. I'm not feeling this way, but I went through feelings like this. You're always going to lose what you love, and I don't want to go through the pain. So maybe you don't even want to start a relationship. You keep yourself at a distance. You become cold. You have a lot of friends as strangers, but you don't want to get too close to somebody, because if you get too close to somebody, they may die. And I don't want to go through that. And you don't want to get too close to God, because, how could he ever do anything for me after he's taken all this? But when you realize and you get over that, at least from, I'm not saying everybody goes through this experience. I think I've met people that have. Once you can get past that, I believe you really get into that acceptance stage, and your life becomes much better. And it's never too late. Some people find it at a young age, some at an older age, but it's never, ever too late. And hopefully this show will help some people, because when you're dealing with these issues that profoundly change your belief system in both the secular and the spiritual world, you have to deal with all of the 6 steps I mentioned here, the 6 steps of grief, which also apply to you, because in a sense, like I said in the beginning of the show, just to wrap it up here, I'm running out of time. When your belief systems profoundly change, you're actually dying yourself. And that's not easy. And the point is, you have to be able to accept the new person you are. And by that acceptance, you can accept others. And you actually then can accept death. And that's kind of where I wanted to end the show today, to go full circle with this. And hopefully you can contemplate this. I know I think about it a lot, and I'll, every so often I go through these steps to understand them and realize that I may have to go through them again, as I'm doing now with the loss of my good friend Miss Moose. So have a good evening. We'll be back tomorrow with Bert Krantz of the Alamo Ministry. See you tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.